if the person is emotionally and psychologically and mentally healthy because they had that secure attachment in childhood, then they are able to emotionally heal themselves, in the sense that we are then equipped with the tools to be able to withstand and weather storms. The problem is, the vast majority of us, we did not grow up in secure attached homes. And so we need to now talk about what is the consequence of that. How is that playing out in all of our lives? How is that playing out in our marriages? It is a fundamental factor in the health of our marriages. That's why when we talk about counseling, it's the counseling that goes to the root of the attachment styles, to the root of this, that becomes the most effective. Because you're not just talking about the surface. You're not just talking about behaviors. I heard the psychologist talk about the difference between first order change and second order change. She said first order change is like moving the chairs on the Titanic. You can move the chairs around, but you haven't actually changed anything. You're still going to sink. And she said second order change is real change. It's getting off the Titanic, getting in the lifeboat. And she gave an example about one of her clients that they kept fighting about whether or not someone was closing the toothpaste tube. And that might sound like, oh, that's so silly, right? On the surface, it's silly, isn't it? One of the spouses kept asking the other spouse to close the toothpaste tube, and the other spouse would one ear out the other, maybe do it for a day or two or three, and then just stop doing it. And it was driving the other spouse mad. Now, we all have a version of this. Where it might look to someone on the outside or even to the other spouse, like, why are you being petty? Why are you being so petty? And what the psychologist said is, it has nothing to do with the toothpaste. That you have to get to the underlying need that is not being fulfilled. In this case, the spouse who kept asking and was being dismissed and ignored was feeling like, am I not important? Do I not matter to you? Am I that unimportant that you just can't do the small thing that I've asked? You understand? So it's not about the toothpaste. And she said that when they were able to communicate that to the other spouse, they completely changed. And now they made sure to close the toothpaste. Why? Because it wasn't just first order change, like, yeah. Because they actually understood at an attachment level, what is the attachment need that is not being fulfilled? And when you can communicate at that deeper level, you get deeper change. So when we talk about what happens now, right? Many of us, we didn't grow up in secure attachment. By the way, what is secure attachment? How is it built? There's an entire philosophy of parenting, sometimes called gentle parenting, sometimes called positive parenting, sometimes called authoritative parenting, where it is focused on building a secure attachment with your child. And the sort of fundamentals of this philosophy of parenting is, on the one hand, empathy, compassion, attunement. It means that you see your child, you validate their emotions, you let them know that they are safe to express their emotions, that emotions are not shamed, emotions are not dismissed, emotions are not punished, they are not ignored. but rather they are seen and they are held and they are validated. Now, when I say that, you might be like, but I'm going to spoil my kid if I do that. And the answer is no, because one of the second fundamental factors in this type of parenting is boundaries. So what they teach is that you have to hold boundaries, but with compassion. So the example that's given is your kid wants a cookie before dinner, and you can tell me what happens when you say no to a 2-year-old who wants a cookie before dinner. End of the world type of stuff. Now that child is going to throw a complete fit, temper tantrum. Do you know that that child is absolutely developmentally normal? That's absolutely developmentally normal. Why? Because the part of the brain that regulates and controls emotion is called the prefrontal cortex. And it is not fully developed until the age of 25 to 30 years old. And for some people, you know, it doesn't ever fully develop. So, and I don't even just say that as a joke. I mean, no, but for real though, so jokes aside, it's actually a real thing. When someone is not, when someone is not raised in a healthy environment, emotionally healthy environment, their emotional age can be very, very stunted. And that's why they say, you know, people like narcissists, for example, are somewhere around the emotional age of a 3 to 5-year-old. Seriously. So what happens, and it's not just narcissists, but it's the fact that we don't realize, but when we were not given the proper attunement, you know, all mental health, it basically goes back to at some point, this human being did not get proper attunement. So if we're not given the proper attunement, it stunts our emotional development. In other words, it stunts our emotional maturity. And that is why we have many people walking around in adult bodies, but internally they are 6-year-olds, emotionally. And that is why when they are triggered, they go back to being 6 years old. And they go back, and I don't say that to be an insult. I say literally they go back to being that scared 6-year-old. So you can imagine what happens in marriage. Because now you get married and y'all know what happens next. You trigger each other. Marriage is basically a place to trigger each other. And that can be a good thing, because as one person said, nothing triggers you, it only reveals you. So what is it doing? It's pointing to your unhealed wounds. See, if I were to get a gunshot wound on my arm, but I cover it up, no one sees it, I ignore it, maybe I don't even realize, or I forget it's there, until someone just brushes against it. It could be the most gentle brush, and I scream. Why? That's a trigger. It's when my reaction does not fit what has happened because there is an internal wound. And this happened in childhood. So what happens now is that when you have two people and their wounds are being triggered. How do their wounds get triggered? I'll talk about that more in detail. But when their wounds get triggered, it's not a 35-year-old and a 40-year-old arguing, it's two 6-year-olds. Because when you're triggered, you go into your survival brain. If you were to look at brain scans, the prefrontal cortex, we said this is where we regulate emotion. Remember the kid who's having a temper tantrum? The 2-year-old their prefrontal cortex isn't even developed. So they can't control their emotions. This is why they have meltdowns. This is why they have temper tantrums. But see, when you're triggered as a 45-year-old or a 55-year-old or a 35-year-old, your prefrontal cortex, it may be there, but it goes offline. It goes offline. And now you are, and this is, I'm not just saying it metaphorically, like in brain scans. You are now literally in your survival brain, which is called the limbic system or the amygdala. And you're no longer thinking clearly at a very neurological level. You are only thinking of survival. In other words, when you're triggered, whoever or whatever is in front of you looks like a lion or a tiger. Can you imagine in marriage? But this is why it's so important to talk about this. Because if you don't know how to regulate your nervous system, if you don't know how to regulate your emotions, and you are constantly getting triggered into your survival brain, and you're constantly thinking threat, 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 I'm not safe, then what's happening is you have a husband and a wife, and they're both looking at each other as the tiger. You can imagine how that's going to go. You are the threat. You are the enemy. You are attacking me. And so now it's like any means necessary to do what? To defend yourself, to protect yourself, to survive this threat. You can imagine why that's not conducive to a healthy relationship, because you're going to be considering the other person the enemy. And this is why it's so important to learn how to, number one, heal those wounds so that you're not getting triggered as easily, and so that you're not going into this fight or flight survival brain, and so that you're not just trying to win or just trying to defend yourself. Going back to the kid with the cookie, because I want to talk about how this all began. We were children once, and that's when it was programmed. So going back to the cookie, see that 2-year-old who's throwing a temper tantrum because they want the cookie. There are 3 ways to respond, 3 philosophies of parenting. The first is what you and I are pretty much most accustomed to, and that's called authoritarian parenting. This is shut your mouth, or you're going to get, I'll give you something to cry about. Stop misbehaving. You're going to have a timeout. I'm going to spank you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the child is now punished for doing literally all the child knows how to do, because the child cannot regulate their emotions. Their brain is not developed to do so. And of course, they're disappointed that they can't have a cookie. That's like their whole world at that age. So you're telling them something that is so devastating, and they don't yet have a developed prefrontal cortex to control their emotion and their reaction. And then you're punishing them for that, when they're actually acting completely behaviorally normal. That's absolutely normal for that age. The second option or response is the opposite, which is called permissive parenting. Permissive parenting, once the child freaks out, the parent will be like, okay, fine, you can have the cookie. Now, the problem with permissive parenting is that you're reinforcing the behavior, number one, and you're also not sticking to protecting the child because it's not healthy for them to have a cookie for dinner. That's permissive. It doesn't have boundaries. We said the authoritarian is punishing the child for having emotion, and the permissive is giving in when they shouldn't, because they're supposed to be keeping the child safe and healthy. Now, what is the middle, which is all about creating a secure attachment? It is to validate the emotion of the child. I can see that you're very upset. You're very angry because I didn't give you a cookie. I totally understand that. But I'm sorry, you still can't have the cookie. So what it is it's validation, attunement with boundaries. And that's the philosophy of building a secure attachment.